Eleanor Voss was 61 years old, and at 5:40 in the morning she was counting $23.50 in loose bills and coins on a kitchen table built for four. The apartment smelled of coffee, reheated past the point of forgiveness, the bitterness of it, settling into the walls the way certain smells do when a place has been lived in alone for a long time. The linoleum was cold under her bare feet, the particular cold of a building with a landlord who considered heat a negotiable expense. Above the table, a single bulb swung slightly on its cord, throwing light over a stack of hospice intake forms she would need to finish before her 7 o'clock shift, $340. That was the distance between what she had and what she owed by Friday. On the counter, propped against the toaster where she would see it every morning without asking to, sat a Christmas card she had not opened. She recognized the paper before she recognized the handwriting, heavy stock, the kind that announced itself before it said a single word. Her sister-in-law had never once in 30 years sent a card that cost less than the electric bill. Eleanor was currently deciding whether to pay in full. She did not open it. She picked up the pocket watch instead. It had belonged to her father, and it no longer kept time. The crystal had cracked the year he died, and no one had thought it worth fixing. It was the one thing she had been permitted to keep. Not chosen, permitted. There was a difference, and she had made her peace with it the way she made her peace with most things now, quietly, without asking anyone to notice. 20 years of being the daughter no one had to feel guilty about. The phone rang at 5:47, and it was not a number she knew. The man on the other end introduced himself as an attorney, said her father's name the way people say a name they have practiced saying, and asked if she had a few minutes. She said she did. She had nothing but minutes. He mentioned a cabin. He mentioned something he called a final clause. She had not heard her father's name spoken by a stranger in 20 years. And now a man in an office 30 miles away was saying it like it still meant something. The lobby smelled of marble polish and the particular cologne of men who bill by the hour. Eleanor's coat had gone thin at the elbows 2 winters ago, and she felt it against that lobby the way she felt most things now. Noted, absorbed, set aside, Desmond was already seated when she arrived, one ankle crossed over the other knee, a Rolex catching the light every time he checked it, which was often, though the meeting had not yet started. His overcoat was cashmere, the kind that did not wrinkle from sitting. He did not stand when she walked in. He had never once, in 58 years, worried about a parking meter, and it showed in the way he occupied a room. As a man who assumed the room would wait, the attorney explained, in the flat voice of someone reading a document he had not written, that a codicil to their father's will had surfaced late, delayed by a filing error 18 months ago. Desmond would receive the remaining investment portfolio, $2,400,000, held in trust, now released in full. Eleanor would receive the cabin in the Adirondacks, along with its deed and 40 years of unpaid property tax attached to it, like a second inheritance no one had asked for. Desmond laughed. It was not a loud laugh. It was worse than that, easy, unbothered, the laugh of a man who found the situation genuinely funny rather than cruel. Dad always said, give Eleanor something to take care of. She's happiest when she's needed by something that can't leave her. Eleanor said nothing. She had learned, over 20 years, that silence cost her nothing Desmond could take from her, and she let it sit in the room the way his cologne did. The attorney slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside was the deed, and one small brass key, its edges worn smooth by a hand that was not hers, it was warm. She turned it over once in her palm before she understood why. Desmond had been holding it in his coat pocket against his body for however long he had been sitting in that chair, waiting for her to arrive. Long enough for it to take on the heat of him. She did not ask why. She only closed her hand around it and thought, for the first time in 20 years, of something her father had told her as a child, half longing. The way he said things he meant completely. The real house is under the house, 214 miles north. The highway gave way to county road, clank, and the county road gave way to gravel, and the gravel gave way finally to 2 bare pressed into the earth by trucks that had not passed this way in years. Eleanor had $60 when she left. She had 11 when she pulled into a motel lot outside Elizabethtown that did not deserve the name. and she paid for the room in cash because the card would have been declined, and she already knew it. The cabin arrived at dusk, the way places like it always seem to. Reluctantly, as if it too had considered not showing itself, she smelled it before she saw it. Wet cedar, and beneath that, the deeper rot of mildew that had been given 2 decades to work uninterrupted. The air changed temperature as she stepped from the car, mountain cold settling into her jaw and her knuckles. The only sound was wind moving through a shutter that had come loose from one hinge and now swung against the siding in a slow, patient rhythm, like something knocking to be let in rather than out. She pressed her palm flat against the porch railing and felt the wood give slightly, soft with rot beneath the paint. Then, finally, she let herself look at it. 2 stories, sagging under what must have been 20 winters of snow load it was never repaired to bear. The windows were boarded from the inside. A chain looped through the door handles, rusted to the color of dried blood. Her hand found the car door before she decided to reach for it. She thought of the watch in her coat pocket, cracked and stopped, and hers anyway. And she thought that leaving without an answer was the one thing she had done, faithfully, for 20 years, and she was tired of doing it. Inside, the flashlight beam moved across old walls, and a fire had gone cold long before she was born. She lit her lighter to check the flue, and the flame did not rise straight. It bent, sharply, toward the back wall of the pantry, a wall with no window, no vent, nothing that should pull air toward it at all. She set the flashlight down on the shelf and began to pull. The shelf did not want to move, and Eanor found a crowbar rusted orange in the mudroom and made it move anyway. She worked it into the gap along the back edge, and her palms, unused to this kind of labor, split open before the wood gave way. When it finally shifted, it did not shift like a shelf. It shifted like a door pretending to be one, swinging inward on a hinge someone had bolted there deliberately, decades ago, and never meant for a stranger to find. Behind it was a second door, low enough that she would have to stoop, set into what should have been solid foundation. In its center, a keyhole shaped for something narrow and old. She already knew which key. It had been warm that morning, in Desmond's pocket, though he had never once mentioned the pantry, the cellar, or the reason a man who wanted nothing to do with a condemned cabin would carry its key against his own chest like it mattered to him. The key resisted, at first, swollen tight in a lock that had not turned in years. She threw her shoulder into the door, once, twice, a third time, until something deep in the frame surrendered with a sound like a held breath finally released. The air that met her was cold in a way the cabin above it was mineral, dry, carrying the scent of iron and packed earth undisturbed by weather for longer than she had been alive. Her own footsteps on stone sounded strange to her, too loud, the only sound in a room built to hold silence. The temperature dropped further with each step down. Her flashlight beam caught something low and dull gleaming along the far wall. Before her mind agreed to call it what it was, 11 wooden crates, stacked in 2 uneven rows. She pried the nearest one open with the same crowbar, and did not gasp, did not speak. Only went very still as the beam settled on what was inside. Not the movie treasure gold she might have imagined as a girl, but silver, hundreds of coins and several dull ingots, stamped with dates that all fell before 1938, the year the banks had finished failing across half the country, and men like her grandfather had learned, permanently, not to trust anything with a vault door. Beneath the crates, a waterproof tin held a folded letter in handwriting she would have known anywhere, dated 1994, and beside it, a sealed deed for 40 acres. Not the cabin alone, but the full lakefront parcel Desmond's mother's family had always claimed, and never, it turned out, legally owned. The letter did not comfort her. It briefed her. Her father had hidden the silver during the panic of his own childhood, distrustful of banks in a way that had never fully left him. He named Desmond's greed without raising his voice on the page. He instructed her, specifically, to have the deed authenticated at the county recorder's office against the original 1938 ledger, not a copy, before she told a single soul what she had found. And he closed with a sentence she read twice, sitting on the cold stone step with her blistered hands in her lap. "You were never the daughter I gave the lease to. You were the only one I trusted with everything." She sat with that a long moment, doing the arithmetic without wanting to. This was worth more, by any honest measure, than everything Desmond had been handed that morning. Light swept across the wall above her, white and sudden. An engine close outside, cut to silence. Desmond came down the stone steps without hesitation, which told Eleanor more than anything he would say for the next 10 minutes. A man surprised by a hidden cellar does not descend into it in a cashmere coat without breaking stride. He brushed dust from one sleeve, glanced at the crates the way a man glances at something he has thought about often but never touched, and said, almost pleasantly, that he'd had a surveyor keeping an eye on the property for the better part of 6 years, waiting for the codicil clause to finally release cellar access to whichever of them inherited the cabin. He had not expected it to be her. He said this without apology, the way he said most things. He wanted to buy it from her, tonight. The silver, the land, all of it cash, and he called the offer generous. Twice in the same breath he used to explain that estate assets of this nature were required under a liquidation clause he described in the confident shorthand of a man who controls the attorney, who would enforce it, to be sold within 30 days of discovery, or forfeited back to the estate entirely. Eleanor did not answer right away. She sat on the cold step with the tin box in her lap, running her thumb along its seam, and let him keep talking, because a man who is still talking is a man still explaining himself, and a man explaining himself is a man who does not yet know he has already said too much. He paced while he spoke, papers in hand. A surveyor's report, a boundary map, a photocopied deed he referenced twice by page number without ever once mentioning where it had come from. A copy, not the original. She filed that the way she filed most things now, quietly, without announcing that she had noticed it at all. Desmond crouched, set a folded check on top of the nearest crate, dust rising faintly where his knee pressed the stone. "Sign tonight," he said, "or I call the estate attorney and we do this the hard way." She looked at the check. Then she looked at the tin box in her hands. And she understood exactly what she had to do. Eleanor did not sign the check, and she did not sign anything else that night. She told Desmond, in the same calm voice she used with families in the last hours of a hospice shift, that she would need to verify the deed against the original Hofixu before she agreed recorder's office, before she agreed to anything at all. Not a copy. The original. She watched something move behind his eyes when she said it. Small, almost nothing. The first flicker of a man realizing the ground beneath a conversation had shifted without his permission. He recovered quickly, told her a copy was standard, legally sufficient, that no one bothered with the original anymore. He said it too fast to be entirely true. The county building smelled of old paper and radiator heat the next morning, and the clerk behind the counter was old enough to remember Eleanor's father by name before she gave it. He pulled the 1938 ledger himself, its binding cracked, counter, under the fluorescent light, and laid it open on the counter under the fluorescent light. The boundary lines were drawn in faded surveyor's ink, and they did not stop at the cabin's 40 acres. They continued, unbroken, through the entire lakefront parcel Desmond's mother's family had spent 3 generations claiming as their own. Every shell company purchase Desmond had made along that shoreline over the past 8 years. Each one quiet, incremental, filed under names that were never his, had been built on a boundary line that had never actually existed. Desmond had followed her to the office that morning, still certain a signature could be recovered with enough pressure, and he was standing close enough to hear the clerk say it aloud. His confidence had always rested on the assumption that no one would look closely enough to catch him. The same assumption that had let him laugh at a will, reading 8 months earlier, certain the daughter he dismissed would never make it this far. Eleanor let the silence hold a moment before she answered him. "You said I was happiest, taking care of something that couldn't leave me," she said. "Turns out I was taking care of the one thing you spent 8 years trying to steal." The clerk did not look away. Neither did the 2 staff members who had come to the counter at the sound of Desmond's voice rising, and then, just as quickly, going quiet. They watched his face do the arithmetic Eleanor had already finished the night before in a cold stone cellar. Watched him understand, in real time and in front of witnesses, that every acre he had acquired was about to become a matter for a fraud attorney rather than an estate one. He left without answering her. He did not slam the door. He simply walked out, and the sound of it closing behind him was the quietest thing he had done all morning. Eanor folded the original deed into her bag, thanked the clerk by name, and stepped out into a parking lot full of ordinary daylight, the kind that did not require her, for the first time in a long while, to explain herself to anyone standing in it. The fraud review took 11 months. Desmond was ordered to repay $1,100,000 in improperly acquired land value, and by the time the ruling was final, 3 other landowners along the shoreline had filed their own suits, each built on the same false boundary line he had never once thought to question. His real estate license was suspended before the first hearing concluded. He did not intend to sell the land. She had considered it, briefly, in the way a person considers the easy version of any decision before choosing the harder one that actually belongs to them. She rebuilt instead. A year later, the cabin no longer sagged under anything. The roof held. The porch boards had been replaced plank by plank, and she stood on them most mornings now, with a cup of coffee that did not need reheating, watching light move across the lake the way it had probably always moved, unnoticed. For the 40 years the property sat abandoned and waiting. She called it a retreat house, though the sign out front simply read the address. Hospice caregivers came for 3 days at a time, women mostly, women who understood without being told what it meant to give everything to people who could not thank them properly before they were gone. The silver had paid for the renovation. What was left of it paid for the rooms those women slept in for free. Inside, on a shelf by the window, her father's pocket watch sat where anyone could see it. No longer locked in a drawer, no longer the one permitted thing among nothing else. Just one object among many that were hers now, plainly and without qualification. She thought sometimes of the kitchen where this had started, the swinging bulb, the $23.50 counted out on a table built for 4. She did not need to compare the 2 moments anymore. The comparison made itself, every morning, in the quality of the light alone. No one had ever asked what she was worth. They had only ever decided what she could be given. It took a locked door under a house to prove they had been wrong the entire time.